Gen Z is about to inherit $84 trillion of assets, the biggest wealth transfer in history. But what if all those incoming stocks, bonds, and real estate aren't actually building wealth for the next generation, but shrinking it? We go backstage at Bitcoin Amsterdam with LeClair, head of Bitcoin strategy at Metaplanet, to ask, is traditional investing failing to keep up? And if just a fraction of that 84 trillion ends up moving into Bitcoin, how high could it go? Let's mine deep. Since 2008, the total supply of US dollars has more than tripled. Stocks might be hitting all-time highs, but when adjusted for monetary expansion, real returns are shrinking. In fact, when you stop looking at the dollar price and instead dominated by the expansion of new money in the system, the S&P 500 has had almost no real growth since the 1920s. In even simpler terms, adjusting for fees, taxes, and inflation, the S&P 500 returns as little as 1.9% per year. The game has changed, and Gen Z knows it. That's why they aren't following the old playbook. 42% of Gen Z investors own crypto. Only 11% have a retirement account. They're not waiting on Wall Street or the Fed. They're taking wealth into their own hands, literally. Gen Z is 65% less likely than boomers to get a financial advisor. And those trends are moving faster and faster every day. While they're not all Bitcoiners yet, it's clear they don't want a middleman when making their financial decisions. That's exactly why Bitcoin makes sense. Sure, there are ETFs and structured ways to get Bitcoin exposure, but in the end, it's one of the few assets you can own outright at any size of portfolio without the need for any counterparties taking a quarter to a full point of returns away per year. So why should you care? Gen Z has sort of gotten screwed over the years when it comes to money. We were born in the most inflated, over-financialized economy in history. College debt is skyrocketing. And now everyone's being told they could have made more money as a tradesperson.
I just bought Instagram.
Hey, did you just outbid me to acquire Instagram?
Yeah, I outbid you. I own Instagram now and you don't.
And home ownership? Some of us might inherit a house, but with property taxes, maintenance, and depending on where you live, uninsurable natural disasters, that's starting to feel more like a liability than an asset. Maybe we're biased at Bitcoin Magazine, but a monetary paradigm shift doesn't come every 5 or 10 years. If just 5% of that soon-to-be inherited wealth flows into Bitcoin, that's a $4.2 trillion demand shock on an asset with a fixed supply. That alone could push Bitcoin well over past 1 million per coin. With so many Zoomers already onboarded to crypto, this could be a massive part of the story as Bitcoin continues to monetize. That's not even factoring in the 21st century space race for countries building up their own Bitcoin reserves, or corporations like MicroStrategy adding tens of thousands of Bitcoin to their balance sheets every year. Once Gen Z fully understands Bitcoin's value and scarcity, they'll have the patience and eventually the financial power to buy and hold the same assets their parents did on their own terms. But if you're a Gen Z and watching this and are still on the fence about Bitcoin, let's just say, if you're mad about the boomers for leaving you this economy, just make sure you're ready to explain to your kids why you didn't buy Bitcoin in 2025. Now, join me backstage at Bitcoin Amsterdam with LeClair.
How do you see Bitcoin faring in the face of global economic, like inflation, recession fears, and rising interest rates?
I think, Bitcoin, one of the things that people championed previously was that it's uncorrelated, is increasingly becoming more correlated with legacy assets. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that's a natural progression. If we expect Bitcoin to kind of be like the bedrock of a new financial system, it'll be completely intertwined with liquidity and the amount of money supply, and the same way that equities move, the stock market moves, Bitcoin will move. So if there was a economic uncertainty and a recession or a stock market crash, like we would expect Bitcoin to go down temporarily. But the long-term prospects are the same, right? They're gonna have to print exponentially more money, and Bitcoin is a fixed monetary supply asset.
Do you think institutional adoption of Bitcoin will continue to rise, or are we at risk of seeing traditional finance lose interest?
I think it'll continue to rise. I mean, the BlackRock ETF and the Bitcoin ETFs in general have been the most successful ETFs launch in the history of ETFs. So, I mean, it's certainly surpassed my initial expectations in a really good way. But I think it'll continue on. There's a lot of people that still have, misconstrued notions about what it is or why it's valuable. But you have, people like BlackRock or companies like BlackRock putting on presentations and putting on rhetoric that Bitcoin maximalists on Twitter have been saying for years. So I think the trend is, only moving one direction. That's up.
For those who don't know what a Bitcoin circular economy is, what is it?
Bitcoin is your means of payment. Bitcoin is what you denominate in. So if I shoot you an invoice for a business expense, it's priced in Bitcoin terms. The three prongs of money are store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. I think that everybody is kind of on their own kind of progress or progression with that, and we don't need to rush it, right? Store of value to start is it's $100 trillion, $200 trillion market, and Bitcoin can take the majority of that. So from there, we'll work on, I think the medium of exchange stuff is great, and we should absolutely develop the best infrastructure and tech and wallets and everything else. But, just tax policy and the incumbent kind of bureaucracy of the West, it's not going to happen imminently.
Do you think the United States would ever become a Bitcoin circular economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a far way out. In the West or G7, like developed countries, Bitcoin is more of a store of value. I think that's okay. I used to think fiat currencies were going to imminently collapse and Bitcoin was going to be the only thing. Not that that's not going to happen or can't happen, but fiat currencies aren't going to go away tomorrow or next year or maybe even next decade, I don't think, right? So in that world, Bitcoin has still a massive role to play. It can still be $100 trillion. You could still be forced to pay for taxes or receive an income in dollars or yen or pesos or whatever it is. So I think, there will be circular economies in every country, in every nation, and maybe in every, state in the US. But, I don't know if we'll see a full-fledged Bitcoin standard circular economy within the next decade or two, but I wouldn't count it out,